normal or what a good marriage looks like and what a good relationship looks like and what a good person looks like. And then without us realizing, we're actually we're we're actually coming across reality, and where reality is different. You're not necessarily going to have a certain paradigm where if somebody is not within this category, within this intricate shape uh, image, then therefore this person is nothing but an evil person. So whether we're talking about the looks of a person, the behavior, the religiosity, their mental state, their money, all of these areas, they're not going to be necessarily as you would expect. And people change with time. So don't expect that the person that you had met during an engagement is necessarily going to be the exact person when you got married. They do change, and the reality of who this person is more apparent to their friends than to you getting acquainted to them while you're talking about an expected marriage. And that's why traditional marriages are actually making better marriages, because they come in with the expectation to compromise, with the expectation we gotta make this work, we gotta make the best of this. We can recognize each other's faults, but we will try to utilize whatever powers, whatever capacity we have in order to make this happen. And this is extremely important because successful marriages are not born successful. They're actually made, they're contributed in. They are they are to be, I would say, to be, mm, I guess, built by you and her. So don't expect it to necessarily happen just out of the blue, including the person's deen. We can have our sins. Somebody, the husband might actually have certain sins, the wife might have certain sins. If we're just going to be there thinking that our duty is to expose each other's sins, that is not actually the case. What you're supposed to be doing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. They're supposed to hide their sins, at least hide just like
No,
you would
I
hide.
I did have a question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Noura.
Because we were talking about all the sins last time, but yeah, so because you're married, I mean, if somebody is married, right?
Right.
And so if you said like the punishment for a sin comes upon uh, uh anyway, I had asked you a question about that uh as well, but like let's say there's a sister who's married to a brother, and the sister, she did something really bad and the punishment comes on her. Would that, like, his you know what I'm saying? Like,
I think I
he
know what you're saying.
okay,
So,
would that be a test for him because he didn't really do that sin? You know what I mean?
right.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
when we look at the implications of sin, let's say it that way, the implications of sin can actually go in different directions. Some of the implications are directly related to the actual sin. All right. And other implications are not directly related. They can be something that can happen in the future in where it's not directly related. It's irrelevant, at least in terms of how we can correlate the implications, or at least correlate the cause and effect type of thing. All right. So not all sins that one would commit where we could actually trace the cause and effect type of way, or from that standpoint. And at the same time, not every single hardship that you go through is necessarily a result of sin. So what we would do is that we would relate with what the different things that we might encounter in general, we would deal with it like it's a result of a sin that I had committed. But that does not to mean that you're supposed to be going through depression. That's it. Well, it's a result of a sin that I committed. But no, we would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to hold us accountable, and we would seek istighfar. And that's why when we're speaking about istighfar, when we're speaking about donating, like the hadith in where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, الصدقة تطفئ غضب الرب. Sadaqa or donation eliminates or cools down the anger of the Lord Almighty. So that actually tells us that there are certain ways to eliminate the implication or at least the impact of sin on us. So whether that is istighfar, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, tawbah, or whether that is spending in a good cause. In other words, basically contributing in a good way to bring about a good action. So what you're trying to do is consider it as evening out. You're trying to even out instead of letting the sins overweigh the scale of what you're doing. You're basically trying to bring about an increase in the good deeds in order to eliminate the impact of bad deeds or sin in the structure of your life or even in the hereafter. And of course,
Okay,
by
and
eliminating that, just give me a second,
okay.
Nora, by
Yes, sure.
eliminating that, you're also eliminating the implication of sin, whether we're talking about on your deen, because what we would always think is that the implication of sin is just on our spirituality. But no, there's an implication on your spirituality. There's an implication on your health. There's an implication on your mental health. There's an implication on family as well. And there's definitely an implication of sin even on your wealth. So I want you to look at those different relationships, because we usually think that when a sin is committed, that it's basically just a religious effect and spiritual effect, and that's it, without us recognizing. Now, that's why you would see the different ayat in where they would relate to, or relate at least sin to those different areas, even in mental health, even in family, even in wealth, etc., all those different areas. So yes, it will have its effect on your heart, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect even on your mind. If it has an effect on your heart, on your mind, then certainly it's going to have an effect on your body. Because remember, mind and heart, those basically have a huge impact in how your body also relates with all these different dynamics. That's why we would see that anxiety, for example, would increase your chances of having something as a stroke, or even probably a delay or even a regression in your cognitive skills, etc., your ability to remember, all of these different things, your memory, all of these different areas. And of course, when we're speaking about mind, that's what we're able to detect, at least on scans. We're able to detect certain things in hearts and blood work, etc. But that does not mean that sin could also affect our soul and our spirit as well. Just because we cannot detect spirit, and we cannot detect it because it's عالم الغيب. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. They ask you about the soul. The answer that الروح, or the soul, is basically from the secrets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the matters that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had kept as part of the unseen, part that only He has the secrets and the knowledge about. no one else. So when we look at the implication of sin, it's important to understand that it actually goes on all ends. And that's why when we look at these words in يظلم نفسه يكسب إثما يكسب خطيئة يرمي به بريئة احتمل بهتانا. So you could see all those different areas are really in order to help us recognize that there's a su that will actually bring about, let's say, a regression in your interest in life, يظلم نفسه, in where you're bringing in a direct cause and effect, in where it's going to bring in a direct harm onto you, on your deen, your nafs, your aql, your abd, your mal, etc. And of course, yaksib ithman, it's going to be a burden without you recognizing. And of course, yaksibu ala nafsihi, and the first person to harvest and to pay the price for any sin is really none other but you, yourself. So don't ever think that you can get away with it by simply not getting discovered. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically letting us know that no, if you were to commit a sin, even if people did not discover that sin, the implication, you yourself knowing what that sin is, and you yourself sometimes committing a sin without knowing, which is yaksib khati'ah. Sometimes we can commit a sin, at least not being deliberate and intentional in wanting to commit a sin, but it might actually make us without us recognizing, in where we're committing some kind of a harm onto some people. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wanting us to recognize that it's important to always relate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove whether you had committed a sin intentionally, unintentionally, major, and even minor sin. Because at the end of the day, if you do recognize that you had committed a sin, then then you had carried a burden where it was simply clear blasphemy. But if you didn't know about it, then you may not recognize that you had actually carried multiple things that will be coming against you without you recognizing. So what is the cure to all of this? Well, yastaghfirillah, seek istighfar. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for basically tawbah. Ask the person if you had wronged the person. There's a difference between wronging or going against the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and between going against the principle of people's rights, that is. So if you're going against the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what you want to do is really ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. If you had wronged people, you had transgressed your limit with people, then in that situation, it's not enough to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for istighfar, but you would actually have to go to the person and compensate them for whatever damage that you had done, whether that damage was personal damage or whether that was materialistic damage, psychological damage. And in case of dispute, because sometimes someone might claim that this is the amount of damage that you had caused me. And of course, in case of dispute, we can definitely have somebody to judge, somebody with ilm, to actually judge what would make a reasonable compensation for these types of damages. And in that situation, of course, we would basically take it step after step. And in order to get to explaining those areas, it's important to recognize وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَهَمَّ الطَّائِفَ. I want you to look at these. A couple of things to mention here, in where when we're speaking about al-khati'ah, whether it's a minor sin, major sin, il-buhtan, etc., there are certain things, even if when we're speaking about, I want to take you to something right there, because when we're speaking about major sin and minor sin. Like we said, it's a burden that one would carry, not because you're convinced of something. That doesn't mean you have the right to expose it, or you have the right to actually talk about it, even though it could actually be true. So when we speak about human rights, I want you to pay attention to this one, because when we're speaking about human rights, we're talking about their nafs is sacred, and what we mean by sacred, in where people's lives are to be respected, in where preserved. Go ahead, Qadri. Qadri Noor, go ahead, my dear.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
So,
salam.
what if you have harmed somebody, and they may not be aware of it, but telling them or exposing it would cause more harm, to not just that person, but maybe other people? Is it like, do you compensate them in a way with other actions, or is it required, like, to absolve that sin, to actually tell them about it?
Fair enough. So that would really be based on the amount of harm that it caused. Do I necessarily have to go to the person and say, hey, here's what I said about you, and here's how I want to fix it? So scholars had differences of opinions in that regards. It depends on the type of harm, like I said. But if we're talking about materialistic harm, because in that situation, this could only be compensated by actually covering it up materialistically. In other words, paying for it. But if it's a reputation, all right, what you're going to do, if you were to come up to the person, hey, I said this and this about you, and then basically, of course, that might actually trigger a bigger problem. They might actually attack you and all of that. So in that situation, there are different ways of how you can do it. Probably the damage that you had caused, now it's your responsibility to basically undo it. It's your responsibility to stand up and say, sorry, I said this about that person, but it looks like I was actually wrong, or I was wrong about this information. I wasn't careful in checking my resources, whatever it is. So in that situation, you want to undo the harm that you had caused, right? You're going to act responsible, and you're going to undo it. Because at the end of the day, when we're speaking about the damage that was caused, the implication that was a result of whatever damage that you had done, in that situation, you basically take full responsibility of it. And that's why that person, yes, sometimes they can exaggerate they can exaggerate at least the harm, and of course the implication of whatever harm that was caused. But at the end of the day is that you have to do your job in seeking istighfar, asking them for forgiveness, or at least undoing the damage that you had done, at least undoing the damage that you had done. And you have to be accountable and act responsible for the damage that was done. So I hope I answered that one. Is that what you were trying to say, Noor?
Yeah, definitely. Jazakallah khair.
Here's another question. What if someone didn't realize transgressing the limits with people? Also, if someone made istighfar for what they did and didn't, would there be still a punishment? So there are certain sins that we wouldn't necessarily know whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forgiven us for such sins or not. And that's why we would have to continue doing istighfar. Now, it's really important to understand that certain sins that you might have committed in the past might still be in effect. And I want you to look at this one, because when you look at this ayah in where he's telling you that some things, they could still be in effect without you realizing. Maybe something happened 20 years ago, but you didn't recognize that you are right now paying the price for something that you had paid or something that you had done 20 years ago. And that's why to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for istighfar and to remember that not because of time, that doesn't necessarily mean that that sin, or at least the burden of and the implication of the sin, is now gone. It doesn't become gone unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives you for it. What if you had been forgiven? If it's a human right, if it's a human right, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you both right before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will then be asked to either apologize or even pay that person from your deeds. From your deeds, that's the currency that's going to be used on Judgment Day. So you have to do your job, probably donating on their behalf and letting them know that I'm donating, probably maybe on Judgment Day, that I donated on your behalf. I'm trying to basically make the dua, give them a gift. There are different ways to at least undo the damage that was done to a certain person. And of course, when you look at would there still be a punishment? Like I said, it depends on the person's well, at least the sin and the person himself, if they do choose to forgive or not forgive. And of course, eliminating from a person's good deeds and giving it to the other person is a form of punishment. I would like to say that there are certain deeds, or at least maybe I shouldn't use the word deeds, but I would say there are certain trials. تسقط بالتقادم. I want you to look at this one. I'm going to use this word because this is very common that sisters would do. And, they would just go and say something and they're like, well, I didn't mean it that way. We can't always necessarily deal with things. It's like, I didn't mean it that way. If you had said it, or if things had passed, then in that situation, you basically have to understand the implication of it. And what does تسقط بالتقادم mean? I'm trying to get my cursor, but it's not happy. It's not happy to, maybe I need to move that one. Hold on, let me see. I'm not sure why it's not allowing me to write. It's not allowing me to write. So we can use this one instead. Okay, I want to write this word. It's called تسقط بالتقادم. What التقادم means with time. There are certain assaults, or there are certain requests for compensation that actually is to be waived with time. Pay attention to this one. By waiving it with time, that does not eliminate the akhirah accountability. So when and what are the things that تسقط بالتقادم? So تسقط بالتقادم simply means that it's waived with time, in where, let's just assume, okay, let's just assume we've got, I'm just going to give an example. All right, I've got person A. I'm trying to, lay out an example here. Let's say we've got person
We
A.
can't see anything on the screen, by the way.
Oh, you can't see anything written on, you can't see the word تسقط بالتقادم on the screen?
No, I can see that little cursor thing, but
Can you see it now?
oh, there it is. There it is.
There it is. Okay. All right, so here we go. So when you say تسقط بالتقادم, that simply would mean that these things with time, they're basically waived. Let's just give an example. When we're speaking about having, okay, different factors in where, one, you were capable of getting your right, but then you didn't ask for your right. And of course, you only brought it up later on, when all the different resources, all the different witnesses, all the different evidences were probably right now gone. And in that situation, it's too late. Okay, so there are certain evidences it would be too late, especially if the evidences or at least the witnesses had basically passed a very long time, then in that situation, you can't necessarily bring it up. Let's give an example. Let's say person A basically has some business with person B. Person A and B, they were together, but then their business didn't work out. They separated. 13 years later, even though they're still in the same place, they're still in the same community, they're still right there. And then 13 years later, person B comes up and says, well, remember the business we had 13 years ago? Yeah, what about it? Well, there were $20,000 of inventory that you didn't give me. And of course, 13 years ago, well, not only 5 years, of course, from the first 5 years, we would basically destroy all the tax papers and all of that in the second 5 years. So we're talking about 2 different cycles that had actually passed. I certainly don't have all the receipts saved from 13 years ago. So now coming up after 13 years and saying 20 or 13 years ago that you had owed me $20,000, you're going to have to basically bring in an evidence. And that evidence, you're going to have to bring it to be solid evidence to prove that I owe you $20,000, because you never brought it up throughout these 13 years. And all of a sudden, you're telling me that I owe you $20,000? Where did that come from? Who's your witness? Where are your papers to prove? Do you have a paper? Let's just assume that basically he brought in a paper that basically says A owes B $20,000 at a price of inventory or whatever it is, and we've got it dated and we have it signed and we've got these witnesses on there. Then we're going to ask A, did you pay the money? A says, I don't even remember such a signature. I don't even remember what that is. So in that situation, we'll basically ask the person to sign. We'll say, البينة على المدعي واليمين على من أنكر. البينة, let me write it down. البينة على المدعي واليمين على من أنكر. So in that situation, we're going to say, all right, the person B, you're claiming that person A owes you $20,000. Can you give us the documents to prove so? Brings me a signed document that has these 2 witnesses. Let's just assume one witness is dead. Uh-oh, what do we got? One witness is dead. We only have one witness left. Then in that situation, we're going to ask, can you actually make an oath that you do not owe this person $20,000? So in that situation, this becomes a qada. This becomes an issue in where we need evidence. Everybody is innocent until proven guilty. So in order to prove that this person is basically here guilty, or at least owes you something, you would basically have to bring in solid evidence. So such an evidence is basically, let's say, torn. We don't have complete evidence in where you didn't bring it up. Let's ask the witness that is on there, are you there to actually tell us that this person owes him $20,000? And then he says, well, yes, I was there. Do you remember where that happened? Do you remember whether it was given in cash, whether it was given in checks? How was it given? All these different details are basically to help us see whether this person is basically remembering and of course has the evidence. So in that situation, al-yaminu ala man ankar, I'm going to ask you to bring about the yameen to actually say, wallahi, I do not remember. So we're going to look and see whether this is a forced signature, etc. But we're going to ask you to make al-yamin and make an oath that you don't owe this person, or at least did you pay it back? So then we would ask you, do you remember paying these $20,000 back? And if he were to say, I don't remember paying it back, so we'll then say, do you have another document to basically eliminate this document? Do you have another document to prove that, yes, this person, I paid him $20,000 on this and this date? Do you have any witnesses that you paid him back, etc.? So in that situation, if I were to have a document, all right, there are certain things, let's say he didn't have a document. In that situation, just by him, was like we were standing in the parking lot, I handed him a paper bag and it contained $20,000, and it was just him and me, or him and I, and there was no one there. I don't have the evidence to prove it, but that was 13 years ago. And I'd say, you don't have any evidence? No, I don't have any evidence. We were standing in the parking lot. So in that situation, I'll say, sorry, but this tasqut bit-taqadum. You don't have any evidence. And all of a sudden you bring it up 13 years later. We could have probably, maybe within 5 years, maybe we still will have our tax papers to look at your inventory, to look at the profit, to look at what you had given him, what you had what profit you had made, what, etc., all these different things and the percentage, etc. But now that you bring it up 13 years later, we're going to say tasqut bit-taqadum, that you were, this basically is waived with time. Let's bring about a different kind of an assault. Let's say somebody claims, a woman comes up and says, that person had raped me, for example. A woman says and claims that a person A raped her. And of course, when we're talking about an assault, that dangerous, of course, most of the times, in fact, usually it's going to be in a private setting. Then in that situation, we're going to say, what evidence do you have? What we need is clear evidence. And we cannot just take just somebody's claim that, oh yeah, I said that and I was in that room and this is what he did and all of these different things. And we cannot necessarily prove through just a me too. And just because a woman said it, we can't necessarily just take it as evidence to prove somebody's guilt. Such things, tasqut bit-taqadum, but it could be true. We're not necessarily saying that it is all made up, but when we speak about trials, in order to hold somebody accountable and basically put an indictment on that person, accuse them of an assault, and basically say that they are guilty, we need evidence. So what if she said, well, there were bruises, there were this and all of that? Well, we don't see it. Let's just say she went to the doctor wrote that there were bruises, but it didn't really say what those bruises were from. And certainly the doctor is just going to write bruises. He doesn't have the jurisdiction or the authority to say where they were from. He just wrote bruises. Obvious bruises on our patient, on the back, etc. But let us say that no, there was a DNA test that was done, and this DNA test that was done on victim A showed that there was indeed a sexual assault. Then that can actually stand to prove that there was a rape case. So that's why it's important when we actually want to talk about proving an assault, we need to recognize the type of evidences that would prove or disprove an assault. It's important to mention that what if the victim here was actually a wife? The wife went and she said, husband raped me. And then went And certainly we found that there was DNA evidence that at least that it was a sexual relationship. She said no consent was given. He said, but there was a consent. Now, is there in Islam such a thing as marital rape? In Islam, there's no such thing as marital rape, and the reason to it is for a number of different things. Number one, in Islam, it considered that the consent already happened on the day of signing the marriage contract, that this man and this woman would basically consent to a relationship. And these relationships would also include, certainly, intimacy. Number two, in order to translate and let me say interpret a consent, it would be because if I were to accuse that person of an assault such as dangerous and such as big as a rape assault, then in that situation, of course, that would mean that I would need clear evidence where no doubt is going to get into that evidence whatsoever before I would accuse that person. And that's why Islam regarded that there's no marital rape, not because the woman's rights are not respected, but because to prove an assault or to prove consent, it would basically need evidence that cannot be whatsoever interpreted in any other way. So to say, well, I gave the consent, I turned around, I looked, I smiled, I didn't smile, I said this, when was the consent given? When was the end? When was the beginning? When was the end? How do we interpret that? That's why Islam said, well, the consent is basically to be given in a direct way, and in front of people and in front of the witnesses with a signature that this is where the consent had begun. As for the other consent that can be interpreted differently, where we can, of course, we can misunderstand, misinterpret, and certainly how do we know whether there was a consent or there wasn't a consent at that, let's call it a private, sensitive timing? That's why Islam will say, well, wait a minute, that sensitive private timing, we cannot really prove whether she is right or he is wrong, or whether who is basically interpreting that consent and whether it happened or not. That's why we need solid, clear evidence to bring about any indictment. So that's why we would basically bring about in where was there a consent or not. So does that mean Islam disrespects a woman's consent and disrespects her right if she wasn't in for it? Well, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ had actually spoken against the person that would assault their wife, at least verbally or even physically throughout the day, and ask her to be intimate at the end of the day. And he basically compared it with a mule, that a woman, you cannot break her and tear her throughout the day and think that she will be there submissive to you emotionally. The Prophet ﷺ compared him to a mule, in where the man, if you want your wife to be there for you, well, you قدموا لأنفسكم. You would basically have to present. You would basically have to be a person that is full of humanhood, that is full of compassion, that is full of learning how to bring this woman and this wife to you with all her consent and even with all her compassion, and not to abuse. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, during the farewell speech, in where he had actually emphasized as-salatu as-salah wa ma malakat aymanukum, be careful. In other words, really giving a direct warning and a direct will, the prayer Be careful with your prayer and don't be forgetful about them, that is. And at the same time, take care. Malakat aymanukum includes two things. Malakat aymanukum can be the concubines, basically the female concubines, that you would not harm them, you would not take advantage, that they're actually under your control. And at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in numerous ahadith, in where that the best of the men are basically the men that are best to their wives. So in other words, not to abuse the woman's in fact the woman's at least vulnerable state. Let's call it vulnerable state. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ had actually called them فَإِنَّهُنَّ عَوَانٌ عِنْدَكُمْ. They are awan. The word awan, the Prophet ﷺ says they are like hostages in your homes. This is not to say that she has to be a hostage, but this is to actually tell the man that recognize that she's basically trying to, yes, we did tell her by the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to obey you. We did tell her that she has to be there to give you the best services, to be there for the children, to be there when you need her, etc. But the Prophet ﷺ is telling you, listen, don't abuse the state that she's like a hostage in your home. Don't abuse that. And a true man would actually be the man that would give her the support, give her the emotional support. In subhanallah, women, although many times we may sometimes be a little harsh on women, but of course, we're here, we cannot be harsh on ourselves. But when we basically say certain things, it's basically to say, hey, and tell the men that women, it's so easy to just come and bring them closer. You just have to know how to find the keys, the right words, the kindness, the compassion. Women, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَوَمَا يُنَشَّأُ فِي الْحِلْيَةِ وَهُوَ فِي الْخِصَامِ غَيْرُ مُبِينٍ. The women, they're basically in areas of fragrance, dressing up, beauty, good words. They didn't grow up in words of harshness or areas of streets and or areas of gains. No, they're women that were only by their fitrah. They're just women that just want to be cared for. So therefore, even the Prophet ﷺ, when Anjasha, look at this, Anjasha was a Sahabi. He was known to having a beautiful voice. Anjasha was riding the camel. And of course, who's on the camels? Well, they were going on the camels, and on the camels there were women, there were men, etc. But the camels, just like human beings, any other animal, when there's a tune, when there's a harmony, when they're singing, they start racing and without even feeling the time, the distance, and they'll start racing. The camels, because Anjasha was singing beautifully and with a very harmonious voice, the camels were basically scurrying, speeding. So the Prophet ﷺ tells Anjasha, says, Ruwaydan ya Anjasha, lutfan bil qawarir. Anjasha, tone it down, because lutfan bil qawarir, easy on the flasks. Who are the flasks? The women that were riding on the camels. They'll start. She's basically not the same weight as a guy. So she's basically riding there and the camel's going really fast and she's barely hanging on. She's about to trip and she's about to fall. She's, the camel, and it's like she's holding on to it and she's any second she's off the camel. But the Prophet ﷺ was careful. Lutfan bil qawarir. We can speed up. We can probably handle it. But I want you to look at the women. The Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith, when he was basically khayrukum li nisa'ih, the best of you is the best to his women, is the best to his wife, is the one that is really making their akhlaq at home. Your akhlaq at home. Happy wife is a happy life. You choose your battle. You want, and wallahi al-azim, it is part of a woman's nature. It is part of a woman's nature. If a man gives the woman a happy life, wallahi, she is willing to sacrifice everything for the man that she loves, her husband. Wallahi, she's willing to sacrifice her family, willing to sacrifice and stay up all night and cook and clean and everything. And she would be doing it with all her love. We, as women, are created. We're built with compassion. We're built with rahmah. We're built with mercy. We enjoy giving. This is what we enjoy. It's part of our making. This is what we enjoy. We enjoy being there, cooking for our husbands, but we just need one word, a word of kindness. Jazakallahu khairan. That was great, even though it's probably salty and not the best. But just tell me, Jazakallahu khairan, that was great. But maybe next time you could reduce the salt. There are different ways of how you can win the heart. Because once you win the heart, trust me, you will not only win the argument. Once you win the heart, you will win the whole household. The children, they'll be there and they're watching what you're doing. They're watching you talk, and they'll be the ones to talk to each other in that same way. If you speak with your wife with compassion, the brother will talk with his sister with compassion. The sister will talk to her brother with compassion. The brother will talk with the brother with compassion. So basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had called you al-Qawwam. He called you as the leader of the household. So therefore, act like one and recognize that al-Qawwam is basically the person that leads the whole household into piety, into good life, into security, into good mental health, into chastity. And certainly, when you see all of that, you will see that that is the best rizq. That's the best value that you can actually get. There's no better value. Uqsam billah, there's no better value than the value that you would actually get on the inside. Happiness and stability on the inside is better than any other money that you might be making. Because the money goes and comes. But the happiness, it will fruit. It will fruit on your health, on your mental health, on your body, on your children, on your social dynamic, all of that. You will see it taking you somewhere else. Now, speaking of which, when we're speaking about tasqut bit-taqadum, just wanted to explain the piece and where, yes, there's no marital rape. Just wanted to explain that one. So what if he was assaulting, etc.? We're not talking about marital rape here. So in that situation, we would take it a case by case and actually see what is the assault. Can you document it, etc.? All those different areas, we would basically look at each and every single case by case. All right. So this is to explain at least, okay, so here's a question. No consent to give bruises, right, if physically harmed. So of course, I'm not saying that when the scenario that we said A came in and the doctor gave a report that there were bruises, the report didn't contain that there was necessarily rape that happened. All right. And even if it said rape had happened, let's say that there was no DNA collected, it was just proving, because in order to collect DNA, basically that would only be in case of an actual ejaculation happening. But if it didn't get to that point, but an actual assault did happen, so then we would need, well, who is it? All right. So just by saying that there were bruises, that was the doctor's report, that's not an evidence to prove who did it. She could accuse Brandon, but it probably was Justin. Okay, that's not an evidence. Just because of her accusing Justin committing such an assault, we need clear evidence that it was really Justin and not someone else, or maybe not her doing it to herself. All right, we need clear evidence in where that's why, because it's so hard to prove those times that are private times. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's why Islam was telling you, don't be alone with a man that is not lawful onto you, because you're going to carry the burden of proving that there was an assault. And how are you going to do it? Who's there? Well, maybe you shouldn't have been there alone. That's why Islam tells you, listen, because you're going to carry all the burden of proving and bringing the evidence, I'm telling you from the start, don't put yourself in those areas, whether it's being alone with a man, connecting with someone, connecting with strangers without mahram, etc. Make sure that you stay safe, because proving and having the burden to prove an assault can sometimes even bringing in more anxiety than the assault itself, because it takes sometimes years of going into court and a lot of money to pay all those lawyers to get you into all of that, and of course to go to the court and time and all of that and thinking about it. It just takes a lot of anxiety, a lot of brain damage. Wallahi al-azim. Islam tells you, stay safe. And certainly, this is not to say that the victim is right now the one held accountable, but we will say that sometimes the victim can be responsible as well, just as certainly that does not justify what happened. But sometimes the victim can certainly be responsible for certain things that they put themselves in. Why were you there? Why did you actually go by yourself? Why did you contact a stranger from the beginning? Why were you dressed in that way? All of these different things would basically bring about more and more onto your case that, yes, this is not to say that the other person is not accountable, but this is also to say, let's not do the dichotomy and actually say, well, if by calling basically the person that caused the assault, that they're basically the ones that are criminals here, therefore the victim is just a victim and cannot be called otherwise but a victim. So we'll say, yes, they are victims, but they also hold a certain responsibility. Why did they put themselves in those areas? They are also accountable for certain things, but they're still victims. All right, let's continue right there. Where was I? وَمَا يَكْسِبْ إِثْمًا فَإِنَّمَا يَكْسِبُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. And actually, we're right there. وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَهَمَّتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ أَن يَضِلُّوكَ. You know what? I'm going to take you somewhere else a little bit. What are you saying? I was just looking at this note right there, and I forgot to mention one thing, which is احتمل بهتانا وإثما مبينا. I forgot to mention and comment on that one. You see this piece of it right there. احتمل بهتانا وإثما مبينا. I forgot to mention, so yeah, I'm kind of jumping out a little bit, and then I want to go back and just remember this one. البهتان, sometimes there can be something that is said about someone, okay? And someone might say, but it is true. This person is a blatant liar. This person is this, etc. So there are two types. Number one, if this person is a fasiq and exposing their sins publicly, then in that situation, that person actually is bringing it to themselves. But if such an information and is not necessarily exposed, let's look at this hadith. It was narrated by Muslim that Abu Hurairah had said that the Prophet ﷺ had said, "Atadruna mal ghaiba." Do you know what il-ghaiba, gossip, or at least backbiting, or speaking about a person behind their back is? قالوا الله ورسوله أعلم. They said, Allah and His Messenger know. And the Prophet ﷺ responded, it is mentioning anything about your brother that they would detest or hate anybody saying about them. Then they said, well, do you, inquired right there, أَفَرَأَيْتَ إِنْ كَانَ فِي أَخِي مَا أَقُولُ? What if that person that is my brother basically had what I'm saying and what I'm basically talking about them in? And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنْ كَانَ فِيهِ مَا تَقُولُ فَقَدْ اغْتَبْتَهُ. If that person really had what you were describing, then in that situation you had basically talked about behind their back. And وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ فَقَدْ بَهَتَّهُ. And if such a claim or such a description was not in that person, then you had committed blasphemy. You had created a major lie. Now, having that being said, it is sometimes possible that we can say about a person, yeah, they're stingy, yeah, they're this, and it could be true that these people are really stingy. These people are really clumsy. These people are really poor, whatever it is. These people are really maybe ugly, whatever it is, okay? It could be true that they are this way, but just because it is true, it does not give you the right to speak ill about them. What is ill about them? Something that if they were present, they would not like it. What if they were present and I was willing to say it to them and in their face and say, you know what, you've got a problem and you are stingy. You are such a cheap person. Let's just assume that I'm willing to say it in front of their face. This is part of وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ. Not because you have the audacity to say it in their face and to their face, it doesn't make it permissible. Because what you would see in the ayah, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ, is basically that ayah speaking about what is il-wail. Il-wail, scholars had differences of opinions whether il-wail is basically the il-wail is basically what they used to have like an eyeliner type of thing, and where you dump it in order to get the dye out and actually use an ithmid into your eye, kind of like an eyeliner. So basically this little piece right there, or whether il-wail is basically a valley in hellfire. At the end of the day, is it ism fi'al? Is it basically a noun to describe the distance in hellfire? At the end of the day, it certainly carries within it some form of a threat at the end of the day. In where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, il-humaza and il-lumaza. Who are il-humaza and who are il-lumaza? Il-humaza are the ones that would basically speak directly to the person. You are cheap, you are this. Il-lumaza, in where I'm giving a body gesture, probably that we're all women sitting together, person B comes in, and I'm basically doing some kind of movement with my mouth, or probably some kind of a physical movement, body gesture, in order to mock person B. Or basically me and my other friend, we basically talked about something, and here it is, we're just looking at it and giving some kind of a smile or some kind of a sly smile in order to indicate that we're basically recognizing person B and her moves or whatever it is. This is ilams. It's not a word. It's more of a body gesture. It's a body language in where it is to mean that you're trying to condescend somebody. This is basically as haram, and even, of course, not any different from il-ghaiba. Il-ghaiba is to speak ill about them behind their back, Ilhams is to speak it directly and say, hey, you are cheap, you are this, you got a problem with this. And 3, in lams is to basically just give some body language to speak ill about somebody. Now, but what if this person is harming me and I'm trying to seek help? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was asking us to eliminate every evil talk, whether it was talking about people, whether it was body language, to talk about somebody in any ill way, condescend anybody, be rude, whatever it is, talk it straight into their face, etc. All of that is actually considered as haram. Now, Islam, then the Quran put an exception, إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمَ, that the Lord Almighty does not like people proselytizing or bringing any ill talk in public unless the person was abused. If the person was abused and they're seeking help, probably calling 911, help, I'm basically getting beaten up here, I'm in danger. That's a different story. To seek assistance, to seek help in situations where you are in danger, that's a different situation. Yet, I would be careful in who you seek help from. Keep in mind, just as in here in the government, basically, if you were to call 911, you basically are, of course, forget about the $1,500, that if this was basically considered, a false phone call, forget the $1,500, but let's just say that you called the police come over, and you're like, that's all right, thank you though for coming, we just figured it out, and the police go. This doesn't go like that. Their police will say, okay, fair enough, thank you for telling us, but we need to make a report. And that's the same thing. Once the government is called, once the Islamic government is called, once any government is called, then the case becomes under their rule to waive or to indict. Just keep that in mind. So my recommendation, before you take your cases to the extreme level, see if you can handle the case without getting other official, informal parties involved, whether it's with your neighbors or whether it's with your husband, your family. Figure out different ways to go that far and actually call government officials. That's when you had really called in an area that will make it into a report, and therefore you don't have the power to say, I don't want it or I want it. So learn, and learning how to handle our cases is basically getting inspired by Umar ibn al-Khattab. Listen to this. Umar ibn al-Khattab, when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was assigned as a Khalifa, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq basically assigned Umar ibn al-Khattab to be the Qadi. To be the what? Well, the judge. Umar ibn al-Khattab, of course, here I am, I'm basically there to judge, but Umar ibn al-Khattab did not have a single case coming. For 2 years, not a single case came to Umar ibn al-Khattab. Every time somebody would say, hey, let's go to Umar ibn al-Khattab, they're like, let's figure this out on our own. What happens? Well, basically, they understand that there's a consequence. That's number one. Number two is that ummah arafat rabbaha. When it's people that knew their Lord Almighty is a metaphor to mean they knew the principles of their Lord Almighty. You're going to see problems getting eliminated. Why? Because they would recognize that it's not an issue of me proving my point or not, but it's an issue that I would know that even if I were to hypothetically win a case, that I would never get away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his judgment, because he is overseeing all of this. Now, this is extremely important in order to bring about an ummah that recognizes its boundaries. It's very important to bring about a taqwa from the inside. And that's what we need to raise our children in. Now, this is basically right there to look at when we say il-buhtan, it's important to recognize that when you want to speak of someone, just recognize that their reputation is also their dignity. Speaking of which, dearest sisters, please pay attention to this. This is becoming very common that sisters, they would misunderstand the ayah and say, well, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم, and would actually speak of what happens between her and her husband, would go in details and talking about private details and speaking about, oh, but I needed to say the story and what happened and all of that. A couple things to say here. Number one, private life is your dignity. Even if you were capable of proving that your husband was at fault during that moment, I want you to remember that by exposing your privacies, you had exposed the most valuable thing about yourself. Once you had exposed the most valuable thing about yourself, you became more vulnerable to others. Even if you're telling a sheikh, be as anonymous as possible. Do not expose yourself. Do not expose your privacies, because by doing so, you're making yourself more vulnerable. You're making yourself basically a person where others will think that they have the right to engage in your personal matter, and then without you realizing, your personal private life becomes people's business. And it's only your business, but you sold it to others. You sold it to others, and you allowed other people to get into your private space. You brought them inside by sharing such information. Do not share such information, because by sharing it, you had allowed them in. By allowing them in, you're basically giving them the authority to start literally dictating, judging you, determining you, dictating where you went right and where you went wrong, and you will look nothing like but stupid to them. And they will start making you as if you're stupid, as if they are Mrs. Know-it-all, Mr. Know-it-all. If they were in such case, you just didn't know how to work out your marriage. You just didn't know how to do this, how to do that. And in their face, you look like nothing but a stupid person. What happens then is that other people will start dealing with you as if they are the ones that are basically in authority. You're inferior. You didn't even know how to solve your own problems. Look at you. You had become exposed to them. Your private life is exposed to them. Learn. استعينوا على قضاء حوائجكم بالكتمان. Yes, it's not an authentic hadith, but the words are right. Use and learn how to get your matters solved by keeping it private. By not keeping it private, you're basically making yourself everybody else's business. You have to learn how to solve your matters. Learn about it. read about it, learn. In one very important book that I always recommend is that men are from Venus, women are from Mars. Always recommend it. Why? Because most family problems are really coming from that angle, not knowing how a man's psychology works and a woman's psychology works. It's not an Islamic book, but it does a great job in at least teaching us what used to be something that was apparent to us at one point in our life, where we had no social media, we had no, resources, but one resource, which is for our eyes to recognize the differences between men and women. It's really strange how the more educated people are, the higher, and statistics show that the higher and the bigger the chances of a divorce more likely to happen. The less educated, the more and the better the chances that the marriage is going to be successful, not because they know their rights and their responsibilities, but it's that many times we overthink outside of the box rather than think inside the box. We think sometimes too much of theory rather than think of reality. We think that by taking in a certain paradigm, that this is where you have to reach. This is what you have to be like. This is what it means to be a good husband, what it means to be a good wife. And then we may not recognize that we're asking for too much of utopian, ideal paradigms that are completely different than reality. It seems, and this is important to keep in mind, that it seems that some of our education has actually gone wrong. It seems that we have become too book smart, but too ignorant in recognizing ourselves, looking outside of the book sometimes and just seeing and censoring how people behave, and how to understand that it's not about how ideal you think people should be in, but it's how ideal in embracing reality and how ideal you become. It's so easy to ask others to become in a certain ideal level. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change your situation until you change what is within yourself. Within yourself. That's what we need to work on. I don't know why I got into all of this, but I guess it takes me one after another. But it's important to, I guess, just recognize a lot of the different family problems, in where, of course, as women, of course, كسب الخطيئة, الإثم, all of that. How is it affecting and having its impact on our life? It could be a masiyah. It could be a sin that we might have committed, and we're trying to figure out and trying to look at the wrong corner. Exactly. Like a person coming in with certain illnesses, but the doctors are looking in a completely different corner, and it could be something else. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling us, well, here's one corner that I want to look in, and that corner is within your behavior, within your heart, within your mind, within the principles that you carry.
That's why I try not to talk too much, because you have more chance on making mistakes when you talk too much.
Absolutely. In Arabic, they say, Man kathura kalamuhu kathura saqatuh. Whoever talks too much, they're more likely to make mistakes. The fish would not be caught if it kept its mouth shut. Only when it opened its mouth that it became more vulnerable to getting caught and eventually dying. Learn. And it's very common that sisters would basically use that ventilation tool. It makes me feel better to ventilate, to my friends to ventilate here and there. And without them realizing, they're like, how did this person get into my life? Well, you brought her in, girl. You brought her into your life. What do you mean, how did she get in there? You didn't realize that you exposed yourself, that you got her in? And subhanAllah, they would wonder where the problem's coming from. The more you expand the perimeter of that circle, the harder it is to collect. And the farther and the more distant away from the main nucleus and the gravity. And therefore, it basically starts losing the gravity of itself, and it becomes more vulnerable to flick away. So get them together and learn how to solve your matters together. And remember, there are no marriages that are born successful. They are to be made successful with lots of compromise, with lots of patience, with lots. And what I mean by compromise, it can include compromise, obedience to the husband within the perimeter of halal, within the perimeter of no harm. So in that situation, of course, we're going to see families actually standing in where the man, you've got a responsibility to be the man, and the woman, you've got a responsibility to be the woman. In where together we can learn how to navigate a better communication. But taqwa is basically supposed to be the spirit on the inside. So another sister, good to hear you back. Allah yahmiki ya Rabbi. Good. It feels good to actually get, I would say, 75% of my voice. Could you please briefly explain, I like the briefly, could you please briefly explain the hadith about those who didn't fully receive the message of Islam? Many of my families believe in God, the Father. Does that qualify them for mercy of Allah? Shaitan is monotheist. Is he included as well? Fair enough. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, we're going to actually come across this ayah. Maybe we can find it right here. I'm going to show it to you. Here we go. This is it. Here's the ayah. See, it's just a couple ayat down the road. All right. Let's see. إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء. The Lord Almighty does not forgive anyone that associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with him, but he forgives all the other sins, or can forgive all the other sins. وَمَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا بَعِيدًا. And whoever associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they had surely fallen into a grave delusion and distance themselves basically away from truth. So when we speak about الضلال, when we speak about shirk, okay, you had said that, hey, shaitan is a monotheist. Why can't he be included? Shirk is actually in 3 different forms. So shirk is not necessarily to believe in one God alone, but there are a number of different things. Number 1, believing in the deity. I'm going to write it down. Believing in the deity himself as only one, no other partner, not a wife, not a child, not any other power shares with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala his powers. Number 2, worship. Want you to look at this one, because when we speak about monotheism or tawheed, it doesn't just involve in where I believe in one deity to mean one God, but it also includes that you worship that one God. So Christians, for example, well, they would believe in God, but then they would worship the Son or worship the Holy Ghost, depends on which denomination you're talking about, or worship Virgin Mary. So in that situation, what did they do? They basically worshiped something else. Or let's say, not necessarily, let's talk about maybe Hindus. They would believe in God, but they would believe that the power, or at least the spirit of God, can reside in different things. So that's a form in where they would worship probably the cow or worship that, and then they would say, well, that's not completely God, but it basically resembles the power of God. So this, by worshiping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's important to mention that worship is farther than ritual, because ritual is one side of worship. There's another type of worship, which is principle. What principle do you carry? Do you consider that the Lord Almighty is the one to define right, wrong for you, justice, etc.? That's a form of worship. So the definition of worship in Islam is more comprehensive than ritual, because your life, what you're looking at, what you're touching, what you're saying, what you're doing in your life, your social dynamics, the effort, the energy that you would invest in, whether the effort meant physical effort or whether that meant money effort, whatever it is, all of that is actually considered a form of behavior, a form of action, in where any action, if it is not abiding by the principle of the Lord Almighty, it is as if the person had basically chosen not to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, does that mean that a person, by committing a sin, that they had went against the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, therefore they had become disbelievers? Well, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically explaining that when we're speaking about shirk, we're actually speaking about one, ritual, we're speaking about deity, and excluded from this paradigm here, excluded يغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء, in terms of behavior, that he would forgive the behavior if we're talking about any other behavior that is not involving associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another form of shirk is basically going into the names and attributes of the Lord Almighty. Maybe I should have actually put it on a different, maybe, let me see if I can go like that and probably use it here. No, it's not allowing me. All right. Basically, any other, maybe I can use a whiteboard. Let me see, where's the whiteboard thing? It makes it easier, right? Okay, here we go. Here's the whiteboard. Yeah, there we go. So if we're talking, oh, it's not allowing me. Oh boy, use whiteboard. Okay, so let's do it again. We're talking about the deity. We're talking about worship. Oops, sorry. We're talking about worship. We're also talking about the names and attributes. And we talked about the worship and the details. So the names and attributes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are two kinds. There are names to describe the Lord Almighty, whether one, he is in power, he's in authority. And of course, it's all to encompasses power, authority, all of those different areas. They're the attributes, in where the attributes are to describe his power, to describe his magnificence. All right. So in that situation, if we are to basically describe anybody as holding parallels or holding basically any or sharing powers in the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is a form of shirk. So let's say, for example, you believed that something is called holy stones and they would give you positive energy, and if you were to put them in the corner, they would give you positive energy, and this positive energy is basically going to spread in the house, and so forth and etc. Or there's something that you would rub, or if you were to throw a penny inside this little lake, or somehow it would give you good luck, etc. That's basically going into shirk. Believing that anybody acts as the force to change your past or your future other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a form of shirk. So when we speak about somebody associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether in ritual or whether in in faith and belief in terms of God Almighty Himself, that will, all these areas would actually be considered as shirk. So did I answer that one, dear? Just wanted to make sure. Okay, so what we're going to do, because I want to make sure that I'm healing, all right? I don't want to jump into getting myself too tired, but inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. And I'm really excited because I absolutely love my tafsir class. All right, so tomorrow, inshallah, we'll continue.
We love it too, mashallah.
Allah yahmiki ya Rabbi, Allah yahmiki. I absolutely love it. And believe it or not, you could see, I'll show you what I've been doing the past few days that I have been not entirely mute, but I'll show you. So we're on page 123. See, I've been preparing and preparing and preparing. And all those highlights are basically the areas that I was really ready to do for our tafsir class. Right? So
Mashallah.
I've
Alhamdulillah.
been basically preparing. So I wasn't, I was probably mute in giving the class, but I was
You
preparing.
were on vacation, a sick vacation, right?
Sick vacation, a leave. Exactly. There you go. So if there are any questions, even if you would like to unmute yourselves, I would be happy to hear you all.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shukr, alhamdulillah, you came back. Your voice came back, alhamdulillah. Love your
Alhamdulillah,
tafsir
Rabbil
class.
Alamin. Allah
Love
yarhamki
it.
ya Rabbi. Allah
Alhamdulillah,
yarda
Allah
anni.
give you
And
ajr.
Matina, I love your name, dear.
Jazakallah khairan, bibiti. I love you for
Allah
Allah's sake.
Allah yahmiki. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all, inshallah, ya Rabbi, happy life and a life full of stability, a life full of spirituality, and a love full of light, and a life full of happiness and guidance for all of us and our children and our husbands and certainly ourselves. Allahumma ameen. There's nothing like that. Wallahi,
This
you know the
life is
salih.
afterlife.
Absolutely.
Ameen, ya Rabbi.
You know, the Salihin used to say, if you don't taste your Jannah in dunya, then you're not going to taste it in the akhirah. There's a different Jannah. It's a Jannah where you would feel it on the inside, that you're recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content over you,
Alhamdulillah.
that you're realizing that on the inside, you don't want this dunya, you want the akhirah.
Yes, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, Amin ya Rabbal Alamin. Allah give you ajr.
And
You never be sick, never, never. Okay, because it feels so sad. I was opening every day, but you were not there. I didn't open today. Then you came, mashallah. Alhamdulillah.
I guess my husband was the most when he's like, finally, a moment of silence. Right? A moment of silence. But alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all good health and inshallah ya Rabbi, give you all, inshallah ya Rabbi, we would always make the dua. Allahumma matti'na bi asma'ina wa quwwatina and absarina wa quwwatina abadan ma abqaytana waj'alhu al-waritha minna. Ya Allah, let us enjoy our health, our hearing, our sight, and certainly our body and our powers and our abilities, and make it always last as long as we live. Abadan ma abqaytana.
Amin ya Rabbal Alamin.
Allahumma ameen. So this is it, inshallah. We'll see you all tomorrow. And Rabbi yahfadkum jami'an. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam
Wa
wa
alaikum salam
All
wa rahmatullahi wa
barakatuh.
barakatuh.
You and your family, all the children, everyone. Ya Rabbi.
جزاك الله خير
And
أستاذة.